Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Video games are great at giving us crazy worlds filled with things that we can only dream of. I remember playing Super Mario 3 on the NES for the first time and for some reason becoming obsessed with what my brother and I used to call Big World. Here everything was massive and you weren't. Since then I've always had a bit of a thing for games where you're a tiny character in a large world, and you'll never guess what. That's what we're going to look at in this video, but you already know that as it's written all over the stuff that you've already clicked on. So how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button and we take a look at some games. We've got a lot to look at here, so I'll try and keep them brief. We are going to start with a couple of games on the NES, the first one being Chip and Dale from Capcom. This is a fantastic 1 or 2 player game where you choose from either Chip or Dale, who both play identically. It just depends if you want to wear a hat or a funky shirt. As with the awesome cartoon series of the same name, you have to stop the evil Fat Cat from being a fat twat. For starters, he's kidnapped Gadget, every furry's dream girl, and I'm sure he has other nefarious plans. All evil characters tend to. You travel through 10 or so real-world levels ranging from houses, gardens, parks, sewers, casinos and more. The levels are all littered with boxes and sometimes other items that you can use as weapons. You can pick these up and throw the boxes to defeat the abundance of enemies in them. You can throw the boxes the entire length of the screen as well as straight up, and something that a lot of people might have missed is that if you crouch while you're holding a box, you actually hide in it, and if the enemy touches it while you're crouched, they will die. Just be careful if it's an enemy that takes more than one hit, as you might take some damage. At the end of most of the levels is a boss, and to be honest, these are a little disappointing. They look great, but you'll soon realise that they're all basically the same. You just get a ball that you need to throw at their weak spot, while avoiding the projectiles they throw at you. Most of the bosses are all pretty easy, and kind of feel like reskins rather than whole new bosses. The game does actually look pretty good here though, with some awesome bright colourful graphics. There is very little slowdown and not much flicker, which is nice. And the levels themselves look great, with a clever use of everyday items as obstacles and platforms. The controls are super responsive and you aren't going to have any trouble with them, but do watch out if you're playing in co-op, as you can't pass through each other, which can cause a lot of unfortunate deaths. This is actually a very short game and is actually pretty easy. Granted, I have had it since I was a kid, but I can usually beat it in about half an hour or so and only die a couple of times. However, it is still a game that I go back to again and again. You can get this as part of the Disney Saturday Morning Cartoon compilation on all modern platforms, and I highly recommend doing so, as you get some other great games there, including the sequel to this one, which is basically the same with some new levels, and it's still a fantastic time. This is a great game and well worth a playthrough. Next up is Monster in My Pocket, also on the NES, this time from Konami. This is based on the toy line of the same name, which I used to collect as a kid, and you know what, I'd kind of like to get them again. You choose to play as either Dracula or Frank, and again the differences are purely cosmetic. If there are any differences, it's very slight, so really it just depends who you like the look of. Both the characters can run and jump, and they have slash attacks that do some pretty good damage, killing most enemies in just one hit. Once again, you make your way through houses, sewers, construction sites and more, so you can stop the evil warlock from being a bastard. The levels here are pretty large and packed with enemy monsters, all of which are recognisable as toys in the franchise, which is really cool. The bosses being some of the main ones like Jack the Ripper, a Yeti, and there's even a Kraken. The game looks really good with massive sprites that have loads of animation, well, the main characters do anyway. The variety of enemies is also very impressive, with new ones being introduced in most levels. Of course, if you're exploring real-life locations, you do have to avoid things like fires, hobs, rogue balls that kids are kicking in the streets. It does a good job of getting the scale right, and fighting in fridges and streets is always good fun. Control-wise, the game is actually really good. It's simple with just a punch and a jump button, but it's all responsive. Your attack does have a quite short range to it, which can be annoying at times when there's lots of enemies. Also, something I thought was a shame is that there's no power-ups or items in the game at all to collect. This isn't really a problem, but it would have been nice if there'd been a few attacks or something to mix things up every now and then. But the game isn't too challenging, and I did actually manage to beat it in about an hour or so after a couple of tries. Thankfully, you do have a generous health bar, and they're pretty decent with health power-ups. The main challenge here are some of the bosses and some of the quite tricky platform sections in the game that have some deliberately cheap enemy placement. You do get a handful of lives though, and a couple of continues. If you do die, you come back right where you died, but if you have to use a continue, then you'll have to start the level again, but that's fairly standard. Overall, this is a very enjoyable game that doesn't get talked about all that often, but I do recommend giving it a go. You can even play it co-op with a friend, but do get ready for slowdown and flicker galore if you do. Let's go over to the Atari Lynx now, because sometimes you have to show some crap in these videos. Kung Fu is a side-scrolling beat-em-up similar to things like Streets of Rage, where you play as a green bit of snot who has to fight various types of food, and I'm not entirely sure why. The intro shows somebody robbing a bank, driving home, and then suddenly I was in control of a green man in a fridge fighting carrots. Fair enough, I suppose. This is not a good game. The graphics are ugly, but not bad for the Lynx. Everything is incredibly pixelated, though I do have to admit I'd actually kind of like the crazy enemy designs, which are basically various fruits and vegetables with angry faces. And because they're angry, you need to punch them and kick them until they explode, which is easier said than done, thanks to the poor controls and bad hit detection. To attack, you just hold down the attack button, and then you'll do a combo. But if you add a direction to the mix, you'll do different things. Pressing down lets you do a sweep, which is needed against smaller enemies, and pressing up lets you do a kick, which is powerful but of course slower. But as I said, the hit detection is so poor no matter what attack you're trying to do. Also, the enemies have to be pretty much precisely on the same plane as you, or you won't hit them, so lining up your attacks is actually really difficult. It seems like the game is aware that it's crappy though, as there's a ton of health power-ups all over the place, which help to compensate for the bad programming. There are bosses in the game too, but often their attacks are just incredibly hard to avoid, so it just becomes an endurance test and you have to hope that you have enough health to brute force your way to the end. This is quite a strange game, which sadly is just bad across the board. The premise could have actually been quite interesting, but it really is just not fun to play, so don't bother. Over to the Super Nintendo now for Harley's Humungous Adventure. You play as Harley, who is a little inventor that's been shrunken down, and now has to get parts of a machine so he can get back to normal size. So yeah, Harley has to explore your usual array of oversized ornaments in order to find items and weapons to fight off evil insects and crazy monsters that are all over the place. You even get some mad, huge boss fights that are absolute monstrosities, and I kinda like them. Now this is a bit of a strange game, in that it looks way worse than it plays. The graphics are a mix of pixel and pre-rendered stuff, and it doesn't look too bad, but it has some really odd animations, especially your jump animation, which just looks stupid and Italian. The enemies remind me of creatures from a show I used to watch as a kid called Bump in the Night, but that's a good thing, and there's a lot of them all over the place too. Thankfully you can get a load of weapons that you can find laying around, from nails to marbles and even little sticks of dynamite. These do a good job of taking out the bad guys, and the controls here are surprisingly good. And actually the level design is quite decent too, and things get mixed up quite often with swimming levels, auto-scrolling levels, and even levels where you take control of tiny vehicles. This is one of those games that I really thought was going to be crap when I started playing it, but I actually ended up quite liking it. Now don't get me wrong, it's not the best game out there, but I'm willing to bet it's a lot better than you thought it was going to be, and it could be one that you enjoy if you give it a chance. Also for the Super Nintendo is Rex Ronan, Experimental Surgeon from Sculptured Software. This is basically a video game adaptation of the film Inner Space, seeing you play as a tiny surgeon who, in order to save his patient, aka a dirty smoker, has to be shrunken down to minuscule sized, and then he enters the body of his patient armed with medical weapons and has to take down the diseases from the inside. Now granted, this is meant to be one of those edutainment titles, so I shouldn't really expect too much, but man, pretty much everything that could be wrong with this game is wrong. First off, it just looks ugly. Not necessarily too bad, as some of the levels look alright and suitably gross, but everything just looks ugly. Rex is unappealing and the animation here is terrible. The enemies are all robots and germs, and apparently the robots have been planted by the tobacco company inside the cigarettes. And nope, that isn't a joke, that's actually what happens in the game. Rex can run and jump, as well as use his futuristic medical gun, which you'll need to use to get rid of plaque on teeth, destroy cancerous cells, and more as the game goes on. There are power-ups that make the gun even stronger too, but be careful as you can run out of ammo, though no matter which ammo you have, it's all very hard to aim and it just feels awkward to use. You can also kick enemies, which is some of the worst hit detection in any game I've ever played, and they are basically unusable. There's 2 different kicks, with one presumably being better than the other, but it's impossible to hit anything without taking damage. Also, there's a ton of enemies here and they all fire lasers that of course are all but impossible to avoid. You also find questions in the levels, and if you answer them correctly, which I'll be honest I still don't know how I actually answered them, then they act as smart bombs, killing everything on screen. In between levels you have to travel in your spaceship thingy to various parts of the body, going through veins and arteries to get there. These are done in the third person and almost look alright, but sadly the hit detection here is terrible and I died a ton when I really don't think I should have. This really is just a miserable game, which is fitting as it's about a bloke dying of cancer, but ironically it makes me want to take up smoking out of stress rather than put me off it. Avoid this game unless you're looking to add one to your bad games collection. Toy Commander on the Dreamcast was one of the first games I played for the system at one of those demo kiosk things you get in shops, and I really loved it back then, and although it's showing its age, I gotta say I still kinda love it today. It also has the honour of being the first Dreamcast game I've reviewed on this channel. Here you take control of a load of different toys, most of which have a military theme to them, but you also get race cars, hang gliders and other such nonsense. The game is divided up into rooms, and you're given a bunch of missions to complete in each room. Each mission gives you a vehicle or 2 that you can switch between on the fly in order to complete the objectives, and these objectives vary wildly. 1 minute you're racing planes, the next you're boiling eggs, and then you're hunting down evil red toys. It really does a great job of mixing up the playstyles. Also, most of the time you can just use one of the vehicles that you're given. It's not that often that you have to use a combination of them, so it is kind of cool that you get to choose your favourite. Each of the objectives are clearly explained, and the game is really quite simple, but it's not always easy. In fact, it can be very challenging. Most vehicles have weapons on them that you'll need to use, mainly to destroy obstacles, but sometimes there are enemy vehicles to battle. The controls are very good, but the handling in some of them can take a while to get used to. Graphically, the game looks fantastic and I really love the style. It's got Dreamcast written all over it, but not literally. Everything is bright and colourful and has a surprising amount of detail. The levels themselves are great and you really do feel like a small toy in a huge house, having to contend with everyday objects getting in the way. It all runs super smooth too, and I didn't come across any slowdown, which was great. This is still one of my go-to games for the Dreamcast, and I highly recommend trying it out if you can. Over to the PS2 now for a crazy game recommended by the secret levels librarian himself, the Mosquito, or whatever you're calling yourself now, Strawberry Man or whatever it is. Anyway, this is Mr. Mosquito. Yep, you are a mosquito, and your one objective in the game is to drink as much blood from the Yamada family as you can. After what is probably the most annoying introduction to any game ever, which is that every single time you load up the game and press start, there is a literal 3-minute monologue about how you are a mosquito, and you cannot skip this monologue, so you have to watch it every single time you turn on the game. I don't know how anyone thought this was acceptable. However, the game itself is actually a whole load of fun. Yes, you are Mr. Mosquito, and each level sees you in a room with a family member, and you've got to figure out how to get them to relax so you can get to their juicy bits. You want to latch onto them and drink as much blood as you can without being spotted or causing them too much disruption. There's 3 family members here. You've got Mr. and Mrs. Yamada and their hot, probably not legal, daughter. Each level is set in a different room and has one family member in it, usually doing some housework, resting, or of course in the case of the young daughter, naked taking a bath. But no, you don't see anything, you creeps. You have to explore the room to look for interactive objects that you can activate to get them to expose themselves to you so you can give them a good sucking. This means you might want to turn on a radio so whoever is in the room has to get up, or you need to turn out the light so they can't see you, or sometimes you just want to leave them alone and they'll fall asleep. If you are spotted, you go into a battle mode where you have a set timer to charge into their relaxation spots somewhere on their body. If you hit them all in time, you basically give the person an orgasm and they forget about the blood-sucking twat in the room trying to spread malaria. If you win the battles, you unlock new colours for your Mozzie, which, as far as I can tell, these don't actually affect gameplay, just change the colour of your mate. As you explore the rooms, you'll find heart containers. Get 50 of these and you'll increase your life bar. And you can also find EX tanks to store more blood, though to be honest I never really knew what these were for, but I'm sure it's important. All these things tend to be hidden quite well in levels and you will need to explore quite a lot to find them. Graphically, the game is really good, all the character models are decent and it's all cartoony and silly. Once again, the sense of scale here is really good. Also, the game doesn't take itself seriously, which is always a good thing. Other than the fact that the controls aren't as precise as they should be, this is a really fun game that's actually very hard to put down. It's essentially a time trial game and you can replay levels as often as you like to beat your previous times. I had a lot of fun playing this one. If you can get used to some loose cornering and that stupid unskippable monologue at the start of the game, then you're likely to have a great time with this one. Thanks, Llama. Pikmin for the Gamecube is a very unique game that's the first of an awesome series of games that is still going strong today. You play as Captain Olimar, who crash lands on a mysterious planet that's kind of like ours but not quite. You find yourself exploring, looking for the ship parts that you've lost so you can fix it up and get the hell out of Dodge. Along the way you find little Pikmin, plant people things, and you can then give them commands in order to help you kill enemies, get rid of obstacles and carry some large items. You can have up to 100 Pikmin with you at any point, and there's 3 colours, each of which has their own strengths and weaknesses. You've got red ones, yellow ones and blue ones. The red ones are immune to fire, yellow ones are fast and can carry bombs but they're weaker, and then there's the blue ones who are the only ones that can survive in water. The game is a puzzle action strategy game and you'll need to grow Pikmin and use them to open up the levels, interact with the scenery and build bridges, smash walls, climb logs and more in order to get the rocket parts. It seems that Olimar and co are tiny too, as most of the enemies are strange versions of regular animals, mostly insects, frogs, bees, moles and more. You'll also find things like food, tins, boxes and other items that look like humans have left behind. The graphics here are fantastic. While the Pikmin themselves don't look too amazing, seeing 100 of the little freaks attacking enemies or carrying items is always great, and the scenery is fantastic and at the time I remember it looking photorealistic. The game is divided into levels, each of which have different number of ship parts. You'll need to go back and forth between levels while you're collecting new Pikmin and abilities, and each level is one day, lasting roughly 15 minutes, and you only have enough air to last you 30 days, so everything here is against the clock. Luckily, you don't need to collect every single ship part to finish the game, but of course the more you have by the end of it, the better the ending you get. The controls here are great. Olimar basically acts as your cursor, and you can call Pikmin and then get them to do things by pointing the C-stick towards whatever it is that you want to interact with, and then the Pikmin, they just already know what to do. It's so simple and it works really well. When you kill an enemy or find an object to carry, it has a number over it. This is telling you how many Pikmin you need to carry it. You can usually have double the number or so that is displayed, and the more you have, the faster the Pikmin carry it back to your base. Although you can only have 100 Pikmin on the field at any time, you can store an unlimited amount of them in their plant pod things. This means you'll need to spend some of your days ignoring ship parts and just farming enemies and plants so you can stock up on your Pikmin. Every enemy or plant you harvest gives you a different amount of Pikmin, and basically whichever colour Pikmin has the most carrying it, that's the colour that it will grow more of. So if you want more yellow, make sure there's more yellows carrying it back to the base. And that's really all there's to it. It's actually quite a simple game, but it's just so much fun and has really held up to the test of time. I highly recommend checking this one out if you haven't already. Every entry in the series is excellent and they're all well worth your time. Sticking with the Gamecube, here is Chibi Robo, a 3D platform game where you're a tiny robot bought for a little girl as her birthday present. Your main function as a robot is to bring happiness to the family that owns you, and you can do this in a number of ways. You can do normal housework like picking up litter, cleaning stains off the walls, mopping up water, and that sort of thing. You can also find certain items and give them to the family. You need to make sure you give the right thing to the right person though to maximise the happy points they give you, like the demented frog girl that's lost all of her rings, so you've got to find them for her. You can also get happy points for just talking to the family or listening to their problems, which is nice. You'll soon find out that the wife is mad with the husband for spending all their money and buying this robot, but don't worry, if you're a good robot, she'll soon come round. The game is split into 2 time zones, the daytime where the family are knocking about, but then, at night, the toys all come to life. Some of them are friendly and some not so much. This is where you get most of your quests. You'll need to help toys with their love lives, save dying animals, fight evil eggmen, and solve the mystery of what happened to the robot before you. It's all very cute and it does play well. Getting happy points and helping others also bags you money, which you can use to buy upgrades, which in turn let you explore more of the massive house. Something that's a bit of a gripe for a lot of people that play this is your battery. You can't do much before you have to recharge your battery, and every action you do counts down the battery timer in the bottom of the screen. The more strenuous the task you're doing, the more battery it takes. As you progress, you get more and more battery power, and to be fair, it doesn't take too long before you get enough. Also, there's loads of plugs around the house that let you recharge as much as you need to. This means that you do have to be more strategic with your time though, and you have to really plan the routes you're going to take and what you're going to do on each day. The game has a good sense of humour, and the story is actually really quite interesting, and I did enjoy meeting the new characters and seeing what they all had to say. Graphically, the game is fine, it's nothing particularly special, but I do like the art style. The huge house lends itself perfectly to creating natural obstacles, and you'll be using drawers and staircases and helicoptering over gaps in no time. This is a very enjoyable game, and one that's good to play if you want a bit of story, and also just to relax. Well worth adding to the collection if you can find it for a good price. Beautiful Katamari, shown here on the Xbox 360, is one of my favourite games for the system, and I always want an excuse to talk about it. The story is pretty crazy. Basically, the king of the cosmos, who also happens to be your dad, accidentally destroys an entire universe, and needs you to fix it, because it turns out he's a bit of a douchebag, though he is kind of funny. To do this, you of course must roll a Katamari, which is a small, tiny ball the size of a marble that's incredibly sticky. You have to roll it around various locations, collecting up items and growing it larger. Then, depending on what you've collected and how much of it, a new planet or star can be created. The better the stuff you've accumulated, the better the star. So yeah, the story makes no sense, but man, the game is just so much fun to play. It has an amazing graphical style where everything looks a bit crap, but on purpose, and because of the style, actually, none of it looks crap, just stylized. And the levels are packed with literally thousands of items for you to collect. As you start out small, you can only pick up items like small sweets, insects, and maybe coins, but as you grow, you can pick up more and more bigger things. Eventually, your Katamari is the size of a house, and you can literally roll up other houses. It's amazing when you go from the size of a marble to a Godzilla-sized monster literally rolling up houses. The controls here are good, but do take a while to get used to. You use both analog sticks to move, and it definitely takes a few tries to get used to how turning works, but once you do, it's incredibly hard to put the game down. Unfortunately, the camera can be a pain in the arse though. The levels here are all really good. You start in shops, houses, casinos and city streets, and the amount of things that you can collect is insane. And I don't mean YouTube thumbnail insane, I mean actually insane. Thousands of items are around every level, and there's so many great touches here, like in the streets you can see parades or movies being made or concerts going on. Then after a few minutes you go back when you're larger and you just roll up the whole thing. It's great. There are also presents to find on the levels, and you can see before you start how many there are on the one you're about to play. These are just for completionists and don't really offer anything else in the game, and they're hidden very well in the levels. Sometimes if you grow too big, you won't be able to get them, so it really encourages you to explore the levels properly. As well as this, some of your cousins are also hiding in the levels, and if you find them, you can switch between them in the hub world. There's no difference between any of how the characters play, but it's always nice to play as your favourite looking one. Some levels here require you to collect certain items, like one level where you need to make a sun, so you've got to collect a load of hot things, or sometimes you need expensive things, or sometimes just anything. This helps keep the gameplay fresh, and each level has a pretty strict time limit, so quite a few of them will take you a few tries to complete. In fact, that's actually my main issue with the game. While you can unlock a free play on each level, the timer just about gives you enough time to beat a stage. And most of the time I really want to explore and roll up as much as I can, but it takes a lot of practice before you can do this. But then again, when you can, that's when the game really shines. It would actually be so easy to reskin this game as a horror themed, where you're a blob or something like that, and it would be amazing. You can see everything you collect here all stuck to your ball, so if you pick up a bunch of people, they're all screaming and thrashing around, or if you've just wiped out the local zoo, you'll see elephants, lions and giraffes making all kinds of commotion. It is great. Couple this with one of the best video game soundtracks that I've ever heard, and you have an overall incredible package. There's Katamari games on a bunch of systems, including most of the modern ones, and I do highly recommend picking up any title in the series, as they are all great. And finally for this video is Unravel for the PlayStation 4 from EA, which is kind of surprising. Unravel is an amazing 2.5D platform game where you play as a character made of yarn. You start in an old woman's house and she's going through some photographs and generally looking at old memories. She drops some yarn on her way upstairs and then you come to life and you take a look at all the photos and you sort of relive the memories, sort of. The game looks absolutely stunning and has some of the best graphics I've seen on the PlayStation 4. All of the environments look photorealistic and you'll be exploring some huge levels in houses, gardens, forests and more. Your main aim is to get to the end of the level and really that's about it, but getting there isn't always easy. There's some light platforming puzzles in every stage and you'll need to use your yarn to swing and create platforms to help you get through the levels. You'll also notice that you have yarn constantly coming out of your back. This means you can only move so far to the right before you can run out, and then you can't move anymore. But don't worry, as there is more yarn on each level, and you'll need to figure out how to get to it to make your leash longer. The controls here are great and pretty simple. You can run, jump and grab things in the level to move them around and help solve puzzles, and you can use your yarn as a lasso or a swing to climb from things. As well as this, you can create platforms for yourself between 2 points. These can be run across, or you can use them to fire yourself into the air like a trampoline. As you make your way through the levels, you'll see memories appearing in the background. Some of these are happy and some of them are quite sad, and the game does a really good job of getting an emotional story across without the use of any speaking or dialogue at all. Also, the music and sound here are fantastic. The game really does have a unique style to it and everything just works incredibly well. I cannot recommend this game enough, and its sequel as well, which plays similarly but also has a 2-player co-op option. This is one of the best looking games I've seen for the PS4. Even if it is just a relatively short 2.5D platform game, I do highly recommend giving it a go. If you're a fan of games like Little Nightmares, then this should be right up your street. So there you go, a load of games where you're a little thing in a big world. What's your favourite here, and what other games are there like this? For some reason they always have a real charm to them, but not you, Rex Ronan. As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, as we have a load of cool content on the way and a bunch of videos for you to go back and watch. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.